minute. A minute late. We said we'd start on time. What? We tell it, good, you sprag, go for it. Yeah, go for it. Sprag. Right. It was lovely to see Eve on Monday. I went to visit her, and I know you've been today, haven't you, Francesca? Isn't she looking amazing? To say that she's had such a big operation and, what an awful situation. She looks amazing. And miracle for her. It's wonderful. Really is amazing. Now, she wants to be out for George's party. So I don't know whether we need to sort of do some sort of escape mission. I don't know how, wheelchair, go in, grab her, bring her back later. But she really would like to be out. But I don't know, is there any news whether she's going to be out? Just waiting to see. Okay, well, it would be lovely if that happens. But if not, she'll just have to smile and bear it, won't she? Bless her. But it's amazing just how she's got through the operation. And she was saying a wound doesn't even look as though there is one. Is that right? She was telling me it's amazing. The other lovely thing was, as Jean was coming in, she was saying it was 17 years, did you say, or 15 years? 16. 16 years since she had a most massive operation and a problem with a sickness. And 16 years on, she's going strong. So, I only mention that because we tend not to talk about this stuff, but it's great, isn't it? And I just wanted to mention that because we're thrilled to have you with us and many more years of health and strength. So, okay, thanks for being here. It sometimes, can be a bit disappointing. You put a lot of work in for a few, but that's not me saying that you few aren't worth it. Please don't get me wrong, and I hope you're here because you want to be, not because you're just being faithful. I hope you're here because you're sort of enjoying the task, the what we say on the lab, the research, the exploration, the experimenting. I mean, I know for some it can be very, very difficult because it's like you're touching, very precious, long-held understanding, and it can be like, what you're doing to my stuff. But let me say right from the start, now, please don't misunderstand this, but a certain person isn't here tonight at the moment, which is going to make it better for me because most of the time they don't agree with anything I'm saying. So I get letters every week telling me where I'm going wrong. Now, here's the point. I am not bringing anything tonight to say that this is what you have to believe. What I have done is gone away and done research and done study, and I am bringing you thoughts, an idea that you can put it into your pot of already understanding, and you can decide, okay, is there validity to that? Is it something that I should be willing now to then give up something in place of this new information, or am I happy to carry on believing what I believed before? And honestly, that is fine. Anybody who tells you that the rock is trying to make you believe something different, it's just not the truth. We are trying just to look into it and offer you thoughts, and you can go away and do with it what you want. Although, what I would have to say is that we are looking for that which sets us free, because what we have noticed is that over the years, you find that, as I spoke a few weeks ago, that what we then believe is this awesome salvation that God has given us, if we're not careful, is bondage, not freedom. And so what we are making sure of is that anything that we are associating with Jesus and his God, who we know him as Abba, Father, that gels together. And it's not like, well, hang on a minute, Jesus is supposed to be the exact representation of the Father, but what it's saying here and what I'm believing doesn't mirror that. If there's a contradiction, we should at least be willing to say, hang on a minute, that doesn't seem to ring true. So does this help as an introduction? Okay. Well, I'm going to tackle tonight And you better not be faint-hearted, because I'm going to touch one of the major things. Now, we've talked before about invented words, like the word hell is invented, the word church is invented, and we've talked about those. Another word that's invented is this one. And you think, oh, is it really? And I'll tell you how. I'll make it clear how. But when you think about it, just like the doctrine of hell is very much a major part of what you would call the Christian common narrative, if you think about it, so is this. And the reason why I've written it like this is because, and I'm getting away from my notes, I'll just have to try and find where I am later, but this is the idea here. In the Old Testament, Satan is mentioned not very many times at all, but that's the Hebrew word, and it's Satan, ha-Satan, basically, and it means adversary. But can you see how the arrow goes to Lucifer? And then here, this is New Testament, where we have the word devil, because the New Testament's written in Greek, which means diablos, right? Which means accuser. Now, the reason why I've got arrow facing either way is the question is, but is Satan of the Old Testament Lucifer? And is the devil of the New Testament Lucifer? Or is this Lucifer something else that we've been, sold a story of? And we have to figure that out, because you see, Lucifer here, the word is actually a Latin word. So it's a very modern word. It's not Hebrew. And he's supposed to be, if you think about it, the fallen angel, who, as the story goes in the common narrative of the Christian story, he was the one who fell in the beginning in heaven. There was a war, and basically he has become this archenemy of God. And if you think about it in the context of the church, is the one who we're warring against. Even in the context of our beings, it's, you even get things like the devil made me do it. Yeah, come on, let's be honest. So, when I talk like this, that we're not just talking about some little fable that, I might have heard about that some while ago. We know that it's attached to the common narrative. Would you agree? So this is what we're going to sort of look at tonight. Now, if you come and have a look at my notes, you will wonder how the heck I can say anything, because it is such a jumble. But it's just the way I work. But then when I come away at it and I think, well, how am I going to... I will do my best. We'll go slowly, right? We'll go slowly. Where am I? Right. So a few weeks ago, I mentioned that I was concerned about this word here, mainly because it didn't seem to fit. Because while I was on away in India, walking along the beach, and I said to Anth, have you ever thought about this? I said, Lucifer, the name, if it is a name, doesn't work in the context of the other names that are used about the heavenly hosts, angels. So we read about Gabriel, we read about Michael. There's many more, and I'm not going to bore you with them all, but there's lots, and they've all got L at the end. And so as I'm going up the beach, I'm saying, doesn't that bother you, to Anth? And of course, it doesn't bother him at all. And I said, well, of course, it should bother you, because to me, that makes me wonder what is going on. And that's why I've already put there. The reason why it doesn't make sense in the context of those other names is because it's Latin. And we come to that name only in the King James. You'll hardly believe this. It's in the King James Version of the Bible, and it is in the Latin Vulgate. I know that sounds a horrible, vulgar word, doesn't it? But it's not. It's the Latin Vulgate that was written in the 4th century by a guy called Jerome. It is only in those translations. Only 2. And the scriptures that actually enforced our whole understanding of this character called Lucifer are only actually in 3 places in the Bible. One is in Isaiah, the other is in Ezekiel, and the other is in Revelation. We're talking about a very short, tiny amount of text that we have based a doctrine on. Now, it might be right. I'm not saying it isn't. We're going to take you through it. But for the text to be so short and in many ways ambiguous, to base a huge doctrine on it makes me wonder, hang on a minute. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit like the doctrine of hell. When you start to tear it apart and people will say, well, you know, Jesus talked about hell more than anybody. And then you go and have a look and you say, he didn't. You get me? It's true. So you have to then say, okay, well, then you look into the translations and this, that, and the other. And you find that we've actually been sold a mischief, which unless somebody's prepared to actually get down to it and do the work of figuring it out, which I'm not saying for anything I've done it perfectly. I'm starting the conversation. Is that okay? So forget that little bit there. We'll come to that in a minute. But let's start by looking then at the scripture. If you want to put it up in the King James Version, please. It's Isaiah 14:12. And we'll read it, but then I'll talk about it. I'll try and make sense of these notes. Because seriously, it's quite a mess. Right, starting from verse 12, it says this. Hang on a minute, because where's my tablet? If I in here as well. Is anybody interested in this? Or are you thinking, boring? Let's find this. Right, the scripture is verse 12. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. Now that's the translation in the King James Version. Now, we'll come back to that in a minute. I just wanted to tell you first about the other, where it all gets a bit messed up, because if you think about it, the Hebrew Bible was what was used to... Actually, this maybe should write on... Do you want to just write this quickly on the board, somebody? If you just write Hebrew Bible, the pen there, Septuagint... Yeah, do you want me to do it? All right, going to be all right. Well, I do it here, it doesn't matter. So just so that I can refer to things. Hebrew Bible, then there's the Septuagint, S-E-P-T-U, I think it's A-G-I-N-T, N-T, yeah, Septuagint. Then we've got the, Latin Vulgate. Right, and then we've got the King James Version in sort of that order. That's great. So, Hebrew Bible, what we've got, it says, let me just find it, and then we can do it properly, can't we? It says, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. But the words for O day star, son of dawn, where there is no Lucifer, it says this, Hallel ben Shahar. Now, I could immediately say, oh, that's exciting, because we've suddenly got somebody with an L. Oh, that's made me feel quite good. Don't get all excited yet. But that is in the original Hebrew. It says, how you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. But O day star, son of dawn is actually, it should be, how you are fallen from heaven, El ben Shahar, son of dawn. Right. That's the actual Hebrew. But they write it backwards as well. So if you want to have a look at it, you can, but it's all the words are in a different order. So that's that. Then in the Septuagint, the son of... Oh, I didn't write this one down. Can you come back? Sorry. It's Heosphorus. You can put it just there if you like. Heosphorus. I know it's a horrible word. Heosphorus. And what that means is just bringer of light, like son of the dawn, bringer of light, because it was referring to a star, a planet, Venus. So we've got a totally different thing in the Septuagint. It's just Heosphorus, bringer of the dawn, and it was actually to do with Venus, the morning star. And then when you get to then the Latin Vulgate, all of a sudden we've got Lucifer introduced, and that's in the 4th century. So Lucifer hasn't been involved until the 4th century, and then we have got Lucifer, interestingly enough, maybe we should write this one down. Come back. Lucifer, but with a small L. Now that's interesting. You can put it at the bottom of there. Yeah. It's only so you can refer to it. So Lucifer, but with a small L. And actually what Lucifer is about in the Latin Vulgate was still attached to it being about not a person per se, but Lucifer was taken from a Roman understanding of it's lucem fair, which again is bringer of light. But you can see how we're getting to the lucem fair. It's actually just a take on what means bringer of light. So we'll look a bit more at these in a minute. But then by the time you get to the King James Version, you've got Lucifer with what? A capital L, because he's suddenly now not any of these other expressions. You've got a name who is the personification of a fallen angel who, like I say, the whole doctrine of the devil or Satan revolves around. Now, does that make sense? So you can see how translations, now, a few weeks ago, Dave Farmond was saying, which is the translation that we should read? And the truth is, there isn't any one of them. You've just got to have a look at them all, because all of them will give you a different idea. Now, sometimes you can pull it all together and it'll give you just this bigger picture. But basically, Lucifer was never a person, was never a name. And in Roman times, which of course the Latin Vulgate, I mean the word Latin gives it away, it's to do with Roman, and it's all to do with the understanding of the morning star which rose up on a morning. The first thing that comes up before the sun, it's what you actually see in the day, and they used to call that a Lucifer. Lucifer, not Lucifer. It was a Lucifer because it was the bringer of light. Do you get it? It's Lucifer. But then they're called the dawn star Lucifer, and then they're called the evening star Venus. So it was all just to do with stars. Now, interesting for me, this. And then, of course, like I said, the Heosphorus is an attachment of that. But then this Hallel, son of Shahar, is very interesting if we get into that, because, are you ready for this? Do you remember when we were talking months ago about how the Bible was written by various writers, and we talked about one of the earliest understandings of the fathers, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Their understanding of God was not Yahweh, it was El. And so what you have in essence is the understanding from this Hallel that we are going back to that place where these names have been mentioned. But what's interesting is that it's attached, and you can Google it, have a look as much as you like. This Hallel is attached to the Canaanite pantheon of gods, which, if you remember, we talked about it before Israel as a nation adopted Yahweh as their own God, or should I say that Yahweh adopted Israel as his portion, Israel was actually adopting a lot of the pantheon of the Canaanite gods, who was led by El, right? And what you've got said is that Hellel, get this, it's interesting, was this lesser god of the pantheon of El who tried to dethrone El, but was thrown out of heaven and he failed. Now, don't you find that interesting? That you've got that story attached to the pantheon of the Canaanites, and if you think about it, they probably decided, oh, we want that story of our own. Now, hear me right now. I am not saying that there isn't Satan. However, we've talked about that Satan can be an adversary, which means I can be an adversary as much as you can. And in fact, I'm going to take you in a while where in the Old Testament you see that even God is called Satan at one point, because it's not Satan as a being, but God was being adversarial. Is that making sense? I'm trying to go slow enough, but I know it can be quite complicated. So I don't know where I am now. So you got the bit about Hallel, son of Shahar. Now, see, these were, like I say, that's if we want to accept this. It doesn't mean it's right, but it's certainly written up that way as Hallel being one of the pantheons of this god El, who was seen as the supreme deity of the Canaanites, and their story is this of this fallen angel. So we do have like a picture, and it could be, and it's mentioned many times in various write-ups, that what happened in the 4th century, that this being known of this story, that basically the Christian new growth of a group were actually just as the Israelites took their own God, in the sense of instead of being polytheistic, they became monotheistic. Suddenly they also have their own fallen angel, which is called Lucifer, but just by a way of through translation, if you see what I mean. So it became Lucifer rather than Hallel, son of Shahar. Right. However, when we go back to the King James Version, it's, where's my thing now? See if I can find it. Where do I, yeah, there. Okay. If we go back a little bit to verse 3 of chapter 14, it seems very clear that what is being spoken about here is not anything that's like heavenly or spiritual or supernatural, because verse 3 says this: and it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow and from thy fear and from the hard bondage wherein thou was made to serve, thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. So that's why I've written him down there too, because we find that the start of this whole business is not talking about Lucifer, even at the beginning, or it's not talking about Venus or the stars or whatever, the Hierophorus. It's actually talking about king of Babylon. Now, it goes on then to talk about how bad he was and what's going to happen to him because he oppressed the children of Israel, basically. And then we come to verse 12. How art thou fallen from heaven? And it says there, O Lucifer. But that, as we've said, Lucifer should not be there, because it actually should be this Hallel, son of Shahar, right? Or just saying, O son of the dawn, morning star. Do you get me? So that's how that should read. Now, since the King James Version, any other version that's come around does not have Lucifer in it. That's gone. All of a sudden, you find that all the modern translations all put shining one or morning star. Now, the truth is, people can still say, oh, well, shining one, morning star, it must be some supernatural being or whatever. But basically, if you get to the, where is it? Right, is it verse, where does it say what's gonna, verse 20, it says this about the king of Babylon, basically. It says, you're going to be trodden down, and you shall not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy land and slain thy people. And basically, you're just not going to be remembered anymore. And your name is going to be cut off from Babylon, and nobody's basically going to know you anymore. Now, how can you say that about the king of Babylon when you know that if this is Lucifer, he is not going to be cut off in that sense, because he's going to be something that for a very long time is going to be a major player in the story. Does that make sense? You're not going to tell somebody, well, you're just going to be cut off and that's going to be the end of it, and you're not going to be buried with the great kings if ultimately this being, because of what he's done and fallen, is going to be basically a thorn in the flesh of the world until it ends. Does that? Yeah, I mustn't say that. Does it make sense? So if you actually have a look, it says, how have you fallen from heaven? If you just go back to, is it verse 4? Oh, I don't know. Because you see, how we come to the understanding of it being a fallen angel is purely by, do you call it speculation or assumption or whatever? Because when you hear things like, how have you fallen from heaven, you immediately assume that we're talking about this realm, this spiritual realm. But you see, when you talked about kings in the old time anyway, you had a different language. Kings were gods. They were looked upon as basically supernatural beings. So that we can't just look at the language and automatically assume that it's saying one thing. Now, again, I'm just laying it out for you. There was basically a sense that this king was being told that, okay, you set yourself up. You wanted to be the greatest, and because you wanted to be the greatest, and you wanted to be above it all, and because it says, one of the lines is, I will ascend and make my throne above the Most High. So there was a tendency to want grandisement and want more, but that doesn't mean to say that it was an angel in heaven. It might have been just like, and we have another example, like Babel, when they decided they were going to build a tower to get to heaven. What was going on? It's because they honestly thought, I can take on God. You see what I mean? So the king of Babylon actually might be like like Nimrod was, saying, do you know what? I can actually get above you, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it also talks about him, and I think I've lost where it is. It talks about him being a man. It doesn't talk about him being an angel, but it says he's a man. And we possibly think that he could be Nebuchadnezzar's son Belshazzar, but it actually is not named. But you can have a look and follow it. You can find how it's named. But also, I'm going to throw another little curveball. This Hillel, son of Shahar, could also be the name that the king of Babylon took for himself. So while it suggests that this Hillel was one of the gods of the Canaanite pantheon, it's also proposed that that could have been the name that the king of Babylon chose for himself. Now again, you think, oh, I'm sure you're saying, oh, just tell me. I don't know. I am giving you all the possibilities so you can make up your own mind. And I know it's a bit difficult. But we know that Isaiah, who's talking about it, and it's a bit like what we talked about the other week, we know that Isaiah was a great prophet. So there's another thing we're going to have to ask in this, is that is he suddenly in his rant about the king of Babylon, is he suddenly being prophetic and talking about something else, like a fallen angel, Or is this the whole rant about the king of Babylon? Right? Oh, okay. Whew. So anyway, the point is, when by the time we get to verse 20, this king, whoever he was not going to basically sleep in his glory, in the sense of being buried with the kings, where he would be known for being a great man. It was just going to be, you ain't getting that end, and that's the end of it. Now, like I said a few minutes ago, I don't think, if we're talking about Lucifer, the fallen angel, that was the end of it. Because we've been talking about it for centuries, haven't we? So that wasn't the end of it. Okay. Let me think. Where am I going from here now? Right. Just talk among yourselves. So I think I've made that. Reasonably clear. Now, the other thing to say as well is that this Hillel, son of Shahar, is the only time it's mentioned in the entire Bible. It's nowhere else. It's nowhere else. And when I said the Bible, I mean the Hebrew Bible. It's once only. It's mentioned once. Isn't that weird? Wouldn't you have thought that if that was... I do actually warm to the idea of it being the pantheon of the Canaanite gods. I quite like that idea. But if we're talking about it being Lucifer, a fallen angel, I think there'd be more reference to it than there is. So can we have a look at Ezekiel 28, please? Because basically, Isaiah 14 that we've just sort of read a little bit of, and Ezekiel 28, verse 17 and 18, we've got this. The word of the Lord came to me again, saying, Son of man, say to the prince of Tyre, thus says, what did it say? The Lord? It went too fast. Oh, covering cherub. Now, can you see the language? Immediately we see cherub, so we think the king of Tyre must be some sort of supernatural being. I don't know, but that's where we get it from, you see. Just like Lucifer was the fallen angel, we get here that the king of Babylon was Lucifer. We get here that the king of Tyre was a cherubs. From the midst of the fiery stones, your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor, and I cast you to the ground. Right? See the cast you to the ground bit? Yeah, we're in there, aren't we? Because we know that this fallen angel was cast out of heaven and came to the ground. So what we read in Isaiah, what we're reading here, and then if you go to Revelations 12, and the problem we have with Revelations 12 is, like we've talked about before, has this happened? Is it going to happen? Is it talking about the fall in this context? Or is it talking about a future last battle where it's all going to be dealt with? It's difficult to know, but what is suggested is that this in Revelation is talking about this first fall that's referred to in Isaiah and is referred to in Ezekiel. So we've got King of Babylon, King of Tyre, which seems to be two men, two different people, referring to this fallen angel Lucifer. Have we got Revelation yet or not? Oh, haven't I got it down? It's about the dragon. It's about the dragon when it says about the dragon will be thrown down to the earth. Have you got it? No, it might be further on. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't write it down. Anyway, it basically talks here about the dragon or Satan or the serpent, which immediately associates with the story, with the garden, Genesis chapter 3. And it says here that it's going to be cast down to the earth. Now, they are the three things that this doctrine is based on. And I'm not saying it's not enough. I'm just saying that's what it is. And so, have you got it? There you go, you see. The great dragon was hurled down. The ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray, was hurled to the earth and his angels with him. Now, the reason why I have a problem with this being about in the beginning is because nearly everything in Revelation we seem to feel was accomplished in AD 70 with the sacking of Jerusalem. And so I am not saying that all of a sudden we haven't become futuristic and prophetic, thinking forward or thinking backwards. But it's questionable because you've got even the idea of, if you wanted to say that John is in the Spirit talking about all sorts of things and using all sorts of symbolism, why isn't this symbolism about something that's happening in Rome in AD 70? I don't know. It's just easy to associate it with the other ones and come up with a doctrine that we think, I like the sound of that. Now, I'm just going to add one more thing. So they're the three scriptures that we use to get our doctrine of Lucifer, basically. But like I said, Lucifer is only in the King James Version and the Septuagint, but Septuagint is the small L, which is not a person. Are you understanding me? But he is a person by the time we get to the King James Version. And then, like I say, modern translations since have dropped that and they've gone back to the morning star. Now, what's interesting also about the morning star is that you've got a reference in Peter, which actually calls Jesus the morning star. And guess what? It's the same word that's used in the original that they've translated to Lucifer, which makes you cringe a bit because you're thinking, okay, if you're trying to set up I don't like the word doctrine. I want another word for doctrine. Somebody give it me. A theory, maybe that's a good word, on this, then you're going to have to sort out the fact that in Peter, Jesus is being called the morning star. Don't you find that interesting? And it's the same word. But anyway, the other verse that sort of, for most mainstream believers, Christians, or whatever you want to call them, they seal the deal with the scripture, Luke 10, verse 18, and it's Jesus. So he seals the deal. And I'll wait for you to put it. And Jesus says this. Can you just go the verse before or whatever so I can see the context? Right. So they're talking about they've been out, the disciples, and the praying and the casting out whatever demons, they're submitting to us in your name, and they're all excited about it. And isn't it interesting what Jesus says? You can go to it now, next verse. He suddenly says, he replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Now, what do you make of that? It's a bit random. Do you? Well, for me, it's a bit random. Now, again, that's the verse that's added then to Ezekiel 28, Revelation 4, Isaiah 14, Revelation 12, Genesis 3 because of the serpent in the beginning, and basically this. And I don't know what that means. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. It could, if it's true that Satan means adversary, it could be talking about anybody. But he might be talking about, who knows, this Hallel, son of Shahar, because if we are pre-Moses' days, when Yahweh comes on the scene, the pantheon of El and all the gods that are there would actually support that. Are you with me? But it doesn't support the post Moses era, because suddenly we're working with not El of the Elohim, we're working with Yahweh, who's the God of Israel. Again, don't please shoot me down that I'm saying that I'm saying anything. I'm just telling you what is there. Is that all right? So let's move on. Whoa. Okay, so the question seems to be then, is Satan Lucifer, or is the devil Lucifer, or are we talking about a different thing? Anyway, you put all that together, and I thought, Bob's your uncle. You've got your plot. So let's look at the fact that all religions have got a devil figure. It's true. You've got in Islamic, they've got Iblis. Hiram is Zoroastrian. Mara, Buddhism. Nidhogg, that's the one of the Norse gods. Angra, Mayu, loads of them. They've all got. And if you think about it, even in the context of who would be God, the devil in the context of psychology, it would be the ego, or it would be yourself. So you can always come up with what is the opposition or the force that's working against the good or the real, the genuine. Do you know what get my point there? So all religions seem to have this, and it's sort of the antithesis, isn't that a word? Antithesis of good. And I mentioned last week when I was talking about songs of Solomon, and not Songs of Solomon, Solomon who wrote Ecclesiastes and also Job, that we always seem to have to find a meaning. We've got to find a meaning for stuff. And there's no difference in Christianity. We've got to find one. And like I say, I'm not saying that this isn't right, but I'm putting to you the questions that come about it. So the fact that we have been led to believe that there is a cosmic entity, this power that is sort of an equal opposite to God. Now, Anth laughs at me when I talk like this because he says, well, I believe that there is a devil or a Satan or whatever, but he doesn't believe that he has the same power as God does. But you see, I was very much brought up to believe that there was these just two opposing forces that were constantly warring, and in the end God was going to win, but it was going to be a battle to the last, and it was always in the context of what that meant for me as well. I'm supposedly saved by the blood of Jesus, but there's this entity that still got power over you, and basically you can try all you like, but do you know what I mean? And that's somehow how I was raised. And even though Anth has a slightly more positive angle on it, it didn't change what my thoughts were about it. So there's like this cosmic entity within the context of the Christian belief. Now, it's interesting that the term fallen angel, that's another term that you don't find anywhere in the Bible. And I think, again, don't we use phrases so often that lead us down a particular line and are suggesting things to us, but in fact are misleading? Now, according to the story, did angels fall? Well, it would appear that something went on, and we can talk about that in a little while and give you scriptures that talk about the angels that are in chains, because in the New Testament, there's the suggestion of that. But actually, the term fallen angel, it's more to do with those who rebelled, as opposed to fall. The term. I'm just talking about the term. Also, I mean, I was very much brought up to believe that whoever this entity was, as a being, as a person, that they were an angel of light. But what's really interesting, if you look in the scriptures for that, there's nowhere it says he was an angel of light. It says he masquerades as an angel of light. Now, that's a very different thing than actually saying he was an angel of light. But again, we are associating things like with the passage in Ezekiel about the king of Tyre, who was a cherub, and we associate and then believe and put things attaching to it. So anyway, so if we're not careful, we can have this idea that this figure always existed right from the beginning of time, and he may well have done. But we've been led to believe that this being has always existed and is only ever going to be dealt with at the end of time, which there's loads of questions there. And I know God is God, and he's able and can do anything he wants within reason because he limits himself because of love. Is it terrible how you have to qualify yourself? But anyway, you get my point. But there are some things that even concern me over thoughts like, hell and the devil and all his angels in the end are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. And then you consider, well, if he's a fallen angel, but he still has supernatural powers because of he's fallen. And of course, we'll have to talk in a little while about the fact of this pantheon. We were talking last week about Job. Satan, he walks into the presence of God, remember, and he's allowed to accuse Job of what he's supposedly done, and there be a court case about it. So we're talking about this figure being free to wander around and do and accuse and do whatever. For me, it's interesting. How does a figure like that die? Can it die? I don't know. I'm glad I'm not God. He's going to figure it out. But we have to ask these questions. So anyway, point is this. If you look at the Old Testament, the whole idea of Satan has evolved. You'll say, well, it hasn't, because it was there in Genesis, right? But you see, that portion of Scripture, Genesis, was not written first. It was written much later on, and you've got the whole idea of then Satan coming into the equation as Satan, as a being, rather than adversary, whereas a being in the story very much later on, because it was not in any way a Hebrew philosophy or doctrine. So, and we're going to look at that now. What time are we on? 8:19. That's taking ages, hasn't it? Whew. All right. So what you could say, just as Yahweh was Israel's God in the context of all the gods that existed at that time, you could say that Lucifer has become the Christian devil because of the translations that's out there, rather than it being about the king of Babylon or about these other things. I won't cover that all again. So in the Old Testament, we have to understand that, first of all, Satan was only a person if you believe in the pantheon of gods, i.e. what was talked about in Job. He's only a person in that context. But here's the thing, he is not a fallen angel, but he actually works on behalf of God. He is an emissary of God. That's Old Testament understanding number one. The other understanding of Old Testament is actually this Satan figure doesn't exist at all, and actually God is both good and is evil. Now, do you want me to say that again or not? Because it's important you get this. In the Old Testament, there's only two understandings of this Satan figure. One is that he works on behalf of God as part of the council, the divine council. So basically, let's put it this way, he does God's dirty work for him. Is that a good way of putting it? That's that part of it. The other part of understanding is you don't believe that there is a Satan figure at all, but in fact God is both good and evil, and he's the bringer of evil and good. He is forgiving, but he's also a mighty smiter. And you have to understand that all of this is basically in God himself. And I can give you scriptures. Some of you will think, well, no, I don't get that, but I can give you scriptures to prove it. So, for instance, when you look at Samuel and it talks about an evil spirit from the Lord, many references to evil spirits being sent by God. And then things like God hardening Pharaoh's heart. I'm only giving you small examples. You can have a look. There's loads of them. So you get in Scripture talking about God inflicting plagues. You've got him being the punisher of evil. But he's also the one who is darkness. So where the New Testament talks about him being light, the Old Testament talks about him, yes, but he's darkness too. Whereas we would say, no, he's just light. I hope this is coming over to you. So basically, Satan, in one stream, is this angry voice of God, the obedient minister, who basically is used by God to do all this stuff, or basically it's just God himself. And I know we mentioned a while back in a study, we talked about who is this angel of death, you see. Who is the angel of death that went over the Passover, for instance? Who is the angel of death? Well, in their understanding, the angel of death would either be the emissary of God to do the dirty work, or it would be God himself. Right, so having got that out of the way, there's another wonderful example, because there's, so you can get it into your mind. In Chronicles 21, 1 Chronicles 21, and in 2 Samuel, there is this illustration of how the understanding was either developing or, let me just tell you what it was, and I'll come back to it. So the scripture goes, well, actually, do you want to put up 1 Chronicles 21:1? Let's put it up. Oh, it's there, thank you. What does it say there, first word? Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to take census of Israel. And if you can quickly put up 2 Samuel 24. But I haven't got the verse. Oh, stink. It's because I scribble so fast, I forget to write them down. Have we got it or not? It's okay if you haven't. There. Again, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he incited. So which is it? Right, now, I can give you another thought about this, which might help a little bit, but I'm not saying it's the whole reason. See, we're pushing loads of stuff into a pot. See, I think it was Samuel that was written first, and Chronicles was written later. And so the same story is being told, but from a different understanding. So the children of Israel, by the time they wrote about Satan rising up against David, is because they'd been in captivity in Babylon. And what do Babylonian religion have? But in Zoroastrianism, they have dualism. They have a bringer of evil and a bringer of good. So when they start then trying to figure out who's doing what, their language might have changed by then, because all of a sudden they're saying, hang on a minute, we learn in this particular religion that actually it's not their main God that does bad stuff. There's actually another one, like a counterpart, another entity that does bad stuff. So you've got that possibility of actually this understanding of Satan as, again, either the emissary of God or this figure who operates in the original pantheon of hell, operating by themselves. Does that make sense? I know this is all right. So where am I now? Right. Okay, so really, where I've put on there is, so what does Jesus make of this? Now, we had the scripture, didn't we, about I saw Satan fall from heaven. And I'd like to believe, and I've read a whole bunch of stuff just recently where it says that what Jesus came to do was to make sure that he totally differentiated any understanding that the Jewish people had of God being both good and evil, Because what Jesus came to do was to say, no, your understanding's wrong. It needs purifying. You need to understand that there is the Abba, my Father, and he is good. He is love. He's forgiving. He's just everything awesome. But there is this other being, Satan, and Jesus said, now we've got to be at least saying, if we're going to follow what Jesus says, we've got to be willing to then say, how much did he say about Satan? Don't you think? Now, it's interesting that if you look at most topics and you want to bring Jesus in on it, I'm not kidding you, he did not make it easy. He didn't at all. You would have thought that with something as serious as this, that he would have had a lot to say, but he didn't. And while I love the idea that Jesus came to make sure that he separated that side of understanding of God to almost put a focus on another entity, I don't know. The jury's still out for me, and that's why I sometimes say I don't even know if I believe in one anymore. But I mean, that's another matter. You know, God will sort me out, won't he? But anyway, let me just go to where I'm going. Right. Am I going here? Right. Okay. Right, because Jesus seems to speak to these disciples about the kingdom of Satan and the things involved, but there's hardly any references at all. And I'll come back to that in a minute. If we get down to it, there are 31 references to the devil by Jesus. No, actually, sorry, I'm not right. There are 5 references to the devil by Jesus and 13 about Satan by Jesus. There are 63 references to the devil and Satan in the whole of the New Testament, but out of those 63 references, there are 18 by Jesus. 18. Again, it's one of those things that you think, surely he should have said more about it than this. Now, he talks about meeting Satan in the wilderness. Now, that's interesting in itself, because one could say, was it a being, or was it something that he was fighting within himself? Again, I don't know. But that's a reference that he talks about. Most of his references are actually saying to the person, like Peter, get thee behind me, Satan. Oh, we're back on the Satan being an adversary or being an accuser. Are you following me? Which he says it to Peter. So he's not talking about this fallen angel. He's actually talking about Peter. He talks about how can Satan drive out Satan if a kingdom is divided against itself. How can it stand? And he talks about Satan takes the seed that's scattered on the ground when in the parable of the sower. Then he says, I saw Satan falling from heaven. And then he says, the story of the woman who'd been bound for 18 years, he says, Satan has kept her bound, but then he unbound her. And then he said, did he say that, or was it just said? I don't know. Oh. Yeah, he says to Peter, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. And then we've got Judas, Satan entering his heart, but whether it was Jesus who actually said that. But point is, can you see how so little's been said, that if we really are making this, big doctrine on it, it's really quite interesting. So let me just go back now, because I've got to see where I am. In Amos chapter 3, verse 6, you don't have to put it up, but this is a verse that's used regularly by people who are sort of in the camp of God is all of it. God is both good and evil. And Amos 3, verse 6 says this, shall there be evil in the city, and the Lord has not done it? That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? shall there be evil in the city and the Lord has not done it? Basically, don't say that anybody else is responsible, because if you say something else is responsible, you're actually challenging the sovereignty of the Most High. Because you see, in the Old Testament, you couldn't have things that were greater than. So even if you said, oh, this is the baddie, and he does bad stuff, it would be like saying that your God was then less than. So in attributing everything to God, whether it be good or bad, you were actually doing a better job than only saying that it was good. Now, I know that's a bit weird, but I'm just trying to give you what basically comes out. There's the scripture that says in James, it says, let no man say when he is tempted that I am tempted of God. So you've got this Old Testament saying that if it's evil, God's done it. And yet in New Testament, so there's these right the way through, there's then the opposite being said. Now, I do believe that we have a better covenant. I believe that what we've been brought through Jesus is greater. And I am concerned that if we're not careful, it's almost like that we've got Jesus with the old added on. Now, I have to take, like I said, into consideration, what does Jesus say on the matter? He mentions Satan. And I'm going to look into some more of that. We need to, don't we? Because we've got to find out what he means. But there was just no way I could go into that today. And we'll have a look at some more of that. But let me just see where I'm going to finish. If you think about it as well, in the common narrative, because we have now got this figure, because it's a theory around this figure of this fallen angel who leads people into darkness and into sin, we even find that we struggle as to the question of what does God allow on our lives. So if you think about it, when we're in difficulty, we'll say, well, if we have these two entities, well, as the devil, is it the devil attacking me? But then we say, well, the devil can only do what God allows. And so you end up in this issue where it would appear that the devil is more powerful than God is. Now, I'm just going to bring you to an interesting thing that is quite prevalent. And again, go online, you can find it very much an emphasis. That, where I didn't write down the reference, but where it talks about if you're on your way to court, and it talks about settling your issue with your adversary quickly before you get to court, because if you don't, he's basically going to sue the pants off you. But if you sort it out with him immediately, basically it'll go better. You remember that idea? I'm sorry I didn't write it down. I should have had the reference for you. But what is a very major ministry that's very prevalent, particularly in the United States, is because of that word adversary, settle with your adversary. They don't take it that it's talking about just general everyday things. Has he found it? Oh, he has. Isn't he great? Thanks, Danny. He's brilliant. Try hard to be reconciled on your way, or your adversary may drag you off to the judge, and the judge may turn you over to the officer, and you'll end up in prison. What that is basically being interpreted as is that the adversary is the devil, or Satan, or Lucifer, whichever one you want to pick. The judge is God, right? But unless you sort out with your adversary, what's that about? The adversary is constantly the accuser of the brethren. We know that from Scripture. So he's accusing me, you, the whole world, every single day. And the point is, from Job, you've got the picture of him going into the presence of God, the judge, and he's saying, Chris Chapman did so-and-so, and if he's right, and I don't sort it with him quickly, God has no option but to do something to me because Satan is right. And that is the most horrendous thought, because, I mean, in all honesty, I was only listening to it this last week. You immediately start thinking, what? Where's the better covenant? Where's the more excellent way? Where's the incredible victory that Christ has won? If that's still going on, because we've got the adversary there in the context of it being the devil who's saying, and the awful thing about it is you can't argue with it, because although he's a father of lies, he's likely to be right. So basically, you just agree with him, get it over and done with quick, and so it's over quickly. I was just saying, nah, I'm not having none of that. You must be kidding. We're not having any of that, are we? So basically, where are we here? To attribute anything of an evil attribute to God would be, if you didn't, that would be classed as dishonoring, because you'd be saying that there was somebody who was as great. So that's why it was like that in the Old Testament. So the New Testament, we've got Jesus coming to break all that down, to say you've got a wrong idea. That's my understanding of when it says, I saw Satan fall from heaven, but I don't know what particularly. So we're going to get back into that at some point. And I think I'm about done. I think that's me. And I think maybe as we ought to have a chat about this next week and see what we think. Did any of it make sense, or was it just... Because I know it's difficult, and I'm not wanting to be clever with it. I just feel that we need to have the information to, The question is, even if in the Old Testament they didn't believe in this cosmic deity, was he actually working behind the scenes anyway, or wasn't he? I do like sorry. Oh, you mean in the context of hell at the end? It's a good question. It is a good question. It does. Yeah. Very Greek, very Roman. So like I say, I brought this because then you can start thinking about it. Have we been sold an idea? Again, it all comes into the context of being controlled. If you are told that there is this entity that is, basically out to get you and threatening, it's going to be that you're going to need certain things. Whereas if we're only talking about the king of Babylon, basically, in the Old Testament, then it's not as scary as we thought. However, like I say, I don't want to take it away from the fact that Jesus said, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So we have to look into that, but I wasn't going to go into all that tonight. So I will call it a day, and we'll maybe ask some questions next week. If you have some papers, and we'll go for it. All right. Thank you.